Welcome. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Smith. I've known Dr. Smith for over 20 years, and I always enjoy and appreciate hearing her speak on her work. Today we'll be privileged to hear her discuss her latest book, American Ski Resort, Architecture Style Experience. Copies available after the lecture. Dr. Smith earned her PhD at Brown University and joined the Wake Forest faculty in 1979. She spent 12 years curating an exhibition on and co-authoring a comprehensive history of North Carolina women. By the time that project was finished in 1999, she said she needed a change. So, quoting from a David Fighton article in the Wake Forest magazine, see, we librarians do our
that's very.
Oh, is that okay? Well, that's said David Fighton.
Oh,
okay. I'll also quote you as saying you were ready to get outdoors and get back to architecture. True? Not true?
True.
All right. On a skiing trip in Aspen in 1994, she'd been struck by the architectural look of the village, and the notion of researching a history of ski resort design stuck with her. I could go on for quite a while listing accolades for Dr. Smith's work. Instead, I'll just mention that American Ski Resort Architecture Style Experience was selected for a 2013... You going to pronounce that award? Uller Award. It's short a few vowels. So. Book award by the International Skiing History Association. And I'll let Dr. Smith get on with her lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Giz just took the first third of my lecture. And I think what that is of course what I said in 2006 to David Fighton. I didn't remember, and then I know I've said the same thing to Carrie King for more recent, so all I can do is, I've got it a third time here, but we won't necessarily look at it. When Hugh, did I call him Giz? When Hugh, Carolyn McCallum, who's not able to be here, and I talked about my speaking today, I have to say none of us thought about the Winter Olympics. We just picked out a date that seemed like it might work. So, dare I say, this is auspicious that we're here. And I also realized as I was putting my images together that I did not have any of the 1960s Winter Olympics in Squaw Valley. That is very heavily treated in the book because it was hugely significant. That was the first televised Olympics. It was the first to use computers. Squaw Valley had 2 buildings and a 2-lane road before everything was brought to bear, including the United States Seabees, the Marines, the Army, to get it ready for the Olympics. So it's hugely, hugely important. And it also was sort of, I guess what made me think of that is this is being taped and now I'm getting nervous with what I'm going to say, that looking at the Russian Olympics reminds me that a big point in the 1960 Olympics was the United States triumphant over the Cold War. And so the architecture was used to be very modern and very technological and very sleek, and to contrast old Europe and Russia with the United States. So that's just a digression. But anyway, I'm happy that you all got here. I'm happy that the weather is just a potential wintry mix, and that we made a good choice. Now, when Hugh and Carolyn talked to me, I was really happy to participate in the C. Smith Reynolds series. I love talking about the ski resort architecture. I have noticed, however, that ever since my book came out last fall, people see me coming down the street or working out at the Y, and suddenly they take off to the right or the left because they've really heard it all. And I feel that I warn you all out, and all I can do is apologize and say I will try not to keep it going. The library and Wake Forest really have been my support and my ally in writing this book. It could not have been done without internet, email, and interlibrary loan. And I just want to give a shout out to Christina Yu, because she was fabulous in getting me all the materials for this book and really going that extra mile. In putting this talk together, what can I say except if I didn't have a happy marriage and love my husband, I have to love Craig Fansler. Because he created this poster, and I've sent it all across the United States and to Canada because I think it's so beautiful. Plus, he did that wonderful signboard out in front of the library and the exhibit that's in the library as you walk in. So, like a library is a really great place to give a talk. I also benefited from the advice and the criticism of my writers group, and that was Anna Rubina, Michelle Gillespie, and Emily Wilson. The four of us met, and let me look at my time. Okay, the four of us met, and Michelle and I were trying to write academic books that would appeal to a general audience, and Anna Rubina and Emily were trying to just do what they always do, which is write beautifully. So it was just a wonderful opportunity. I also had the world's two best English teachers, Peter Brunette and Ed Wilson, who read my manuscript. And you might be asking, now why would you have these venerable English professors and film studies people read the manuscript? Really, there wasn't anybody else willing to do it. So I appreciate that. And then my husband, Jackson Smith, checked every single word and every image in the page proofs 3 times. So the book looks good. I can't take any credit for that. That's Oklahoma Press. But I really had a lot of support at the beginning of the project. Now, when I started this research project, I discovered there were 2 groups of people. Those who wondered if it was legitimate research, and those who wanted to be my research assistant. After the press designed such a beautiful book, a 3rd group appeared who wonder, will this gorgeous book fit on their coffee table? And I want to tell you, it will. Now I worry that people will think, oh, it's a coffee table book. In fact, the press told me they had submitted it for awards in coffee table category. And I'm a little taken aback by that because I think, well, now people won't realize that actually is a scholarly book. So if I can worry about anything, I will. Now, Giz already told you that this project started that this project started after 12 years of my coordinating the North Carolina Women's History Project with exhibits, publications, and that I did. Now I felt I needed a break from women. When I spoke to David Feighton in 2006, I may have said, oh, I felt like I needed to get out of doors. So I'm not sure what the true story is actually there. Studying ski resorts does not have the mission aspect that underlies a woman's history book, like Emily Wilson and I wrote many years ago. That project took 12 years, and this one has taken 14. So clearly, I need to think seriously about what my next project is going to be. People usually ask me, why did you write about ski resorts? Partly, and I think we're an academic audience here, and I'll just be blunt. Partly, the scholarship on women's history was vast and unrelenting. It seemed to me every day 3 more books had come out, so I was overwhelmed with it. Why scholarship on American architecture is controllable. On recreational architecture, scant. Oh, darn. Okay. And on winter recreational architecture, it's non-existent. So therefore, I had the field entirely to myself, which is pretty nice as an academic. Okay. I went back to my original field of architectural history. I got to research an activity I loved when I was young, and I still love to do it. I got to develop my own methodology and my own narrative. I started research at the Library of Congress. As I said, the interlibrary loan was absolutely critical, and then made site visits to New England, the Rocky Mountains, and the West Coast. I interviewed developers and architects, and I think this is actually one of the contributions of the book, is using the lens of mountain resort design. I was able to create a narrative of post-war architectural and landscape practice. So one of the points of the book, if you look in the index, are all these biographies of architects. And some of them you would know, and some of them you might not know, but the book brought them all together in a narrative. If I turn my head, can you still hear me? Okay. I won't tell who all these people are, but this is what your developer of a ski resort looks like. Ted Johnson was the world's best powder skier, and to get money to create Snowbird out in Utah, he traveled around in a Pontiac with a model of the resort in his back seat. This was a mergers and acquisition man in New York who started Stratton. Up there, Tom Corcoran was a world-class skier and went to the Harvard Business School. And I don't know if anybody knows the man in the center, but he is a Wake Forest alumni father. His son went to school here, and that's Leslie Otten, who started the American Skiing Company, and I think he owns the Red Sox right now. But anyway, that'll give you an idea of And I also got to meet and interview architects who had worked on it. Since the majority of ski resorts were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, these people are still alive. And because they've lived this healthy outdoor life, they're eager to be part of history. So up here is Henrik Bull, who just recently died about 2 months ago. He designed the first A-frame in New England and then went on and designed resorts for up until about 3 months ago. His nephew is Eric Stone in the psychology department. So there's a Wake Forest connection there. Eldon Beck in the center is the person who created what we think of as mountain recreational communities with Whistler Blackham. And then Bill Lipsey is designed solar houses. So this is just 3 examples. The ski industry that I'm looking at, mainly the post-war industry, really parallels the baby boomers. And this is a World War II and a baby boomer story. But in 1960, baby boomers were 14 years old. 1970, they were 24 to 7. 1980, between 17 and 34. And 2000, between 37 and 54. The point of those figures is baby boomers started as young people skiing. They got older and they started building mountain vacation homes. So that boom goes through there. Giz already told you that I decided to work on ski resorts when we went out west on our first trip in 1994. And I was just amazed that this was the picture that Craig Fansler picked for the poster, because this is actually where we went to Snowmass, Colorado. And I'd been used to the higgledy-piggledy design in New England. We got there, and it looked like somebody had thought it through and actually planned it. And indeed they had. A man who was a huge California developer of suburban homes and a Frank Lloyd Wright alkalite and student. So what you have is this road that goes up the mountain and the buildings that open up to the slopes, and then, of course, the huge, beautiful mountains in the background. I brought an architectural historian's eye to the sport. Skiing is all about freedom, escape from the city, experiencing nature at its most majestic. Yet, architecture is the threshold to enter nature. And ski resorts have different styles, and they help to shape and reflect the experience that one has. So I set out to create a typology. That's a very architectural historian thing to do, and to look at the sequence. And this is what I did. Thinking about ski resorts as a microcosm of the American experience, reflecting our tendency to have swift descent, overreaching ambition, thudding downfall, followed by picking ourselves up and starting all over again. And this book has sort of paralleled that, which you will see. I'm going to quickly run through the major points or just highlights in the book. From the ski industry start in the Great Depression and Vogue magazine, and of course what we all notice is that the model was smoking and skiing, that they were simultaneous activities. Also the fact that women are there in the 30s, because skiing is pretty much a sport that both men and women have done through time. The poster to encourage people to take a snow train up to Maine and New Hampshire on Sunday, because Sunday was the one day that people taking those ski trains could actually go skiing. New England towns that had been summer vacation resorts, picturesque villages like Stowe, got new life. Usually they just closed up and the economy tanked during the winter, but with skiing, it brought people all year round. WPA projects and the Civilian Conservation Corps jump-started ski activity all across the country. And this is one of the great models, the Timberline Lodge out at Mount Hood, Oregon. The other thing I'll just tell you that this book has major photographs by really the preeminent photographers in each of the resorts or the sport. And that's why I've put their name, but if you were out in the Northwest, Ray Atkinson is a photographer. To the first destination ski resort in Idaho. And what set Sun Valley apart from the others is you had to have time and money to be able to take a train across the country from the West Coast and the East Coast to get there. So that was a social filter and an economic filter. And of course, there's Averil Harriman looking quite wonderful. To creating Resort Aspen. Aspen had been such a dilapidated mining town that when the Union Pacific engineers were looking where to put their resort, which became Sun Valley, they were afraid people would be too depressed if they put it in Aspen. That doesn't surprise anybody? You don't care, okay. I find that remarkable. I wish that, but what you had in Aspen was the remains of a town, a viable town, so it was an authentic Western town. It was a ghost town, and here is Gary Cooper, who is photographed up in the turret in a Life magazine article by Peter Stackpole. So there was this sense of mission to bringing Aspen back. And one of the keys to Aspen's resurgence, rebirth as a ski center, is the fact that only 70 miles away, the troops in World War II were practicing. And on the weekend, they would trek over the mountain, go to the Aspen. Evidently, they didn't get enough skiing. 5 days, and so they were doing it on the weekend and, of course, hitting the bars. So the troopers became the ski school. What you have is a post-war boom in recreation and rise of disposable income in the 1950s and 60s, and the two auto ads show that. What happens after World War II is the creation of these purpose-built resorts on unsettled land by the 10th Mountain Division and other architects and veterans, all of whom had been, or many of whom had been educated on the GI Bill. And this is Peter Seibert, who was the founder of Vail, and his partner, Earl Eaton. They discovered Vail Mountain and bought up the land, telling people it was a hunting and fishing club. It's a similar impulse to other 1960s new towns like Reston, Virginia, and magic lands like Disneyland. So these were all happening in the 60s, enclaves free of real-world urban problems. And in Vail, sort of a pseudo-alpine village there. Now, there's a shift. You know, generally, if a ski resort was trying to brand itself, having some sort of an alpine connection was appealing because that was the historic association with the sport. But in the 60s, you had that resurgent American, we don't need to acknowledge that we can be modern. And so resorts like Snowmass and Snowbird, a lot of snow, out in Utah, we felt Snowbird should be a strong, bold, high-density, very studiously American resort. So the architecture is being used to shape what you're going to discover when you get to the resort. Now, there was vast overbuilding in the 50s and 60s, which led to the environmental backlash in the 1970s. And I'll talk more about that. There's also in the 70s a confluence of historic preservation, the bicentennial, the environmental movement, and what that tends to result in is a regionalism reasserted of the sense that where you're from is more authentic. So if you're out west, you want to look Western. If you're in New England, you want to look New England-y. For someone like Robert Redford, who used the proceeds of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid to develop his ski resort, Sundance, he was trying to develop without development. So in other words, this is a generation of being very conscious of how you seem authentically natural. And the final evolution starts in the 80s, but is still predominant today. The total experience of an exclusive mountain village enclave in the 80s and 80s and 90s. And this is Whistler Blackham. There's Eldon Beck again. And the idea of making a 4-season resort so that it can generate enough money to go. Now, as the resorts get more and more complicated, obviously they have to have more capital, and this is that shift from the individual developer to the corporation. And if anybody has any questions or comments, we'll talk about that. Beaver Creek, once tourists headed to the mountains to escape urban life, now the mountain setting is urban, and it has urban problems: traffic, overcrowding, unfettered growth. In terms of housing that's adjacent to the ski resorts, underground and solar houses was one movement. Over the top houses, 40, 50, 60,000 square feet in some cases. Affordable housing. Where is everybody who's working in these resorts going to live? And of course, the predominant marker of a ski resort is condominium development. Now, the American Ski Resort is a big book, so you will be relieved that I've just pointed out highlights. Still, I wanted to end with 4 things that I learned from my research. And I hope that we can have a conversation afterwards with your own thoughts and questions. I learned how important the federal and state governments were in encouraging skiing. Skiing starts in 1930s depression, and practically every single resort, Sun Valley, Mount Hood in the west, Stowe, Waterville Valley in the east, all started with civilian conservation projects and WPA projects. The thinking was that jobs were important, and the Blue Ridge Parkway is an example of that. And so was winter recreation for men and women. In other words, there was a push from the government to encourage getting out, being active, and also jobs. 75 years ago today, the most famous ski instructor in the world, Hannes Schneider, arrived in New Conway, New Hampshire from Nazi Austria, thanks to US government intervention. So the government intervened there. The US Forest Service controls 1/2 of the ski mountains in the east and almost all in the west. I was surprised when I found that out, but you may have known that. And here's Franklin Roosevelt opening up the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, and here are WPA workers building the building. I also learned how critical World War II was to the development of the ski industry. During the war, 200,000 soldiers experienced skiing. Afterward, 10th Mountain Division and other skiing troops became the heart of the fledgling ski and outdoor recreation. The camaraderie forged by years of training and service, skiing as a way of life, they didn't want to give it up, became the impetus to Aspen's and other ski towns' rebirth. Aspen Crud is what those guys are drinking at the Hotel Jerome, which is bourbon and milkshakes. Now, I had always thought that the 1950s, the Eisenhower era, was dull. Troops came home, got married, had children, moved to the suburbs, and didn't want any more excitement. But modern day skiing owes everything to World War II and what those veterans did when they came home. They didn't have much capital, but they had a huge impact. All of the innovative gear and equipment, the new instructional methods, the publishing and promotion, managing ski areas, developing destination resorts for mass audiences, the airline industry reconfigured for vacation packages and domestic service, the interstate highway system, all of that is what was a very powerful motor for the ski industry. Peter Seibert, who you've seen in various instances skiing down a mountain, studied hotel management in Switzerland on the GI Bill. His classmate was Craig Claiborne, and then he came back, started Vail. Countless architects used the GI Bill to go to college, and then part of their practice was in the recreation industry. So the impact of World War II is very, very important. A third thing I learned is the environmental pushback to ski resort overbuilding coalesced on January 1st, 1970. I'm not kidding. That is exactly the day that Jackson and I started skiing. We were on our, we were on taking a ski week in Vermont and just trying to figure how to get down the mountain. Many years later, doing this research, I discovered that's when all the legislation came in on January 1st. So actually, President Nixon gets the credit for a lot of that, and also the environmental policy. There was a huge standoff between the Disney Corporation and the Sierra Club over Mineral King in California that ended up with that land being taken into the National Forest. Stratton's Frank Snyder felt snookered. He's the guy on the tractor there. Vermont had greeted him warmly in 1960 for the economic good that a quality resort like Stratton provided in an economically deprived state. And the Stratton said, now by golly, they don't want us anymore. And up there is Mount Snow, and that's what a lot of the pushback against ski resort development was. It wasn't just what's happening on the mountain, but it was the parking lots and the sewage and the proliferation of housing. One of the unintended consequences of the environmental regulation is that it extended the developmental stages and escalated the initial costs of the resorts. And so what you get was a heightened demand for a limited commodity. And the priciness of ski resorts is partly because they're not quite so much endangering the environment now. Oh, it must be half hour. Okay. Okay, this is the fourth thing I learned. I did learn more things, but this is the only four I'm going to share. Carrying my manuscript to my New York City publisher on September 2008, the day Lehman Brothers collapsed, turned out to be fortuitous. The New Yorkers wanted to dramatically downsize the book, which was deemed too luxurious for the hard times we're about to enter. But I lucked out because Oklahoma Press saw this as a Western story, put all their best efforts into the production. You know the expression, it takes a village. Well, mine was in Norman, Oklahoma. And I plied them with Dewey's cookies to keep everybody's spirits up. Okay. Today, the ski industry faces challenges of exclusivity, climate changes. I brought the New York Times article on the end of snow, which I unfortunately read just before I came here, and I'm totally depressed. A vulnerable economy and an aging skier demographic. Thank God for snowboarders. But to go back to the theme of my book, architecture continues to define the reinvention, from wilderness outpost to alpine village to mountain recreational community. And this is Deer Valley, Utah, and what this says is when you come here, there is shelter from the snow, it's welcoming, it's embracing, and it's also Western with the big timbers. On a final note, in promoting this book in a digital age, I have learned what transactional relationships and social media landscapes and Google rankings and reader reviews and Amazon discounts are, all of which I have to admit I never had to as a venerable tenured professor. And this, I'll just point out, here's more support from the library, Jill Carraway coming to my book signing, and that's me holding my book because Barnes & Noble, you have to buy the space to have your books there. As an academic, you don't know these things. And so they didn't want me on that side of the window, and so I had to sneak in and hold the book up. But that's what that what that is. So I hope you have questions. Say thank you to Jackson Smith for great photography, and Henry Bull, two of the buildings that he designed. Thank you.